Okay, I wanted to turn to Psalm 11 this morning as we rekindle our discussion about our attitude toward the home. The 11th Psalm begins, "In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to my soul, flee like a bird to your mountain? For behold, the wicked bend the bow. They fitted their arrow to the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do?" And so the psalmist here is acknowledging that life is difficult and that there are people out there that are working against those who have an upright heart. The wicked, he says, bend the bow and have fitted their arrow to the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. And so they're all around us and they are working against us. And then he asks the question, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? What are the foundations? What's he have in mind when he says, if the foundations are destroyed? To an obvious extent, foundations are representative of those things which uphold structures that are built upon them. They are the base, if you will. They are what gives strength to the structure. If the foundations are bad, anybody that's had a house in South Louisiana that develops a crack in their foundation and things start shifting, the soil shifts under it. We have notoriously terrible soil. Things move around and shift constantly. If the foundation is bad, what happens to your house? It falls apart eventually. And so that's the problem. But as we look to identify what foundations are, we're talking about the fundamentals of things. Obviously, truth has to be considered one of the foundations. But what did God do at the very beginning of all things? And we talked about that 2 weeks ago. We read from the scriptures in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26, 27, and 28, and in chapter 2, verses 15 through 25, at the very foundation of the world, when he was creating all things, the very first thing that he did after he made man was do what? He made woman and created a relationship between the two, a family relationship. I would suggest to you that our families are also foundations. Society is built off the family. Before he created nations, he created families. Before he called out a church, he created families. There are responsibilities within those families to function, and responsibilities that families have towards society at large and the community around them. And all of that is based on the family. But what happens when the family falls apart? Or when it's ignored altogether? You ever heard anybody express that they have no confidence in marriage, it's only a piece of paper? Well, it's just a piece of paper. You don't have to worry about that. It's just a piece of paper. No, it's not. That piece of paper isn't marriage. The ceremony is not even marriage. All the money we spend to put on those big things, that's not what marriage is. Those things surround marriage and represent marriage. The marriage itself is a commitment and a promise. It's a covenant. We understand the value of other covenants. We have jobs. When we take our jobs, we make agreements with our employers as to how many hours we're going to work and what kind of work we're going to do and how much we're going to get paid for it. And if our employer decided not to pay us, what would we do? We would probably sue for our wages. We would ask the court to compel them. And on what basis would we argue that we had a right to that money? We had a contract. That's a covenant. We entered into an agreement that said if I performed these tasks, then I would get paid this much money. They need to honor that agreement. We understand that it's wrong to make an agreement with someone and dishonor it. Marriage is a covenant. It's an agreement between two people. And as it's put in the Scriptures, it says that a man shall leave his father and mother, that is, to be separated from the household or the home that he was born into. He should leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Reestablishment, a new home being created, the foundation of which is the husband and the wife. Offspring are just that, the offspring of that relationship. What comes forth out of it. But that covenant, that promise, that agreement, that's what marriage is. And to lack respect for the promises that you make, to be faithful, to be devoted, to lack respect for the fact that this is a one flesh relationship, is part of what destroys and makes life even more difficult for people today. The fact that people have not enough respect for the covenant at all, that they just don't enter into it. And they don't respect that there should be a man and his wife. That's part of the foundations being destroyed. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? He goes on to say, the Lord is in his holy temple, the Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see, his eyelids test the children of man. The Lord tests the righteous, but his soul hates the wicked and the one who loves violence. Let him rain coals on the wicked. Fire and sulfur and scorching wind be the portion of their cup, for the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. The upright shall behold his face. In other words, what shall the righteous do if the foundations are destroyed? The answer to that question is, remember that God is in his holy temple, that he is sitting on his throne, and that he sees, that he is testing man, and that his judgment will come against evildoers. What do I do when I realize that the foundations are crumbling? I remain faithful and I wait on the Lord. We live in a time where foundations are crumbling. There is a lack of respect for the family. Divorce is way too common. Infidelity is even more way too common. I think and I don't know, I haven't seen any numbers on this, so I can't tell you for sure, but I think we might have moved into an interesting new phase. When divorce became easy, when no-fault divorce laws were passed in 1970, there were a lot of divorces that existed without cause. That they didn't have a reason. You used to have to prove that someone had broken the covenant in order to get a judge to grant you a divorcement. They said, well, we're not going to do that anymore. We'll grant divorcements without cause. And so there was a whole lot of marriages that ended without there being... I think infidelity is such a problem today that a lot of divorces that happen as a result of infidelity, whether the people even realize the law of God regarding divorce or not. There's just so much infidelity that goes on. It's not even bothersome to a lot of people. I believe that there is a generation of people that would not understand the premise of the Scarlet Letter. Why this adultery would be such a problem. We have a lack of respect for the family, a lack of respect for marriage as God gave it, a failure to fulfill our responsibilities within those relationships. There's a lot of marriages that don't end, but husbands are still not good husbands and wives are still not good wives, and the benefits and the purpose of the family is not accomplished. What's the primary purpose of the family? Comes from Genesis 1, 26, 27, and 28. He formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed life into him and then said what? It's not good that a man should be alone. I will make him a helper suitable to him. In other words, I'll make a mate. Humans are not independent lone creatures. Can we exist that way? Sure. Is that the way we're constructed? No, not according to God. It's not good that a man should be alone. So that just means that it's even greater work to successfully navigate life if you do it alone, which, by the way, makes a very strong argument for the fact that we, as Christians, should be mindful of those among us who are not married, that we should be mindful of those among us who have unfortunately had to go through divorces and are alone in this world, and we should take special care to reach out to them and help them and try to serve them, because it's not good for them to be alone. It's harder for them. And so we need to be there to be a support and an encouragement and a help when they need those things. When we acknowledge that the home originates with God, we develop a greater respect for it. We develop a greater respect for its responsibilities. Listen, my obligation to be a good husband isn't based on whether or not I like my wife or whether or not she's a good wife. My obligation to be a good husband arises from what? From my relationship with God. If I value God and I value my relationship with God, then that controls the kind of husband that I am. And what God says about a lot of relationships is, listen, it doesn't matter what people do to you. What does Jesus tell us to do for those that persecute us? He says, pray for them. What about those that do evil to us? He says, don't return evil for evil. What's the Bible instead say? Overcome evil with good. And so when someone mistreats me, that's just a reason for me to do what? Treat them right. Does that apply to my home life? Or if my spouse does something that irritates me, does that give me license to do something that irritates them back? How much tit for tat goes on, and how long does it go on before these relationships completely destroy? Or worse? There was a tragedy down in Youngsville just, was it 10 days ago? Maybe 2 weeks ago. I think it was about 10 days ago, though. Not only had the marriage fallen apart, but something else terrible happened. And the estranged spouse ended up killing their spouse and then committing suicide in front of their children. You don't do those kinds of things if you understand that your responsibilities are not tied to what you think about other people or how you think other people are treating you or whether you think they're doing the right thing. When you understand that my obligation to treat people is connected to my recognition of God and my recognition of His goodness. If we got into a tit-for-tat thing, we would lose with God. Home relationships are vital. And there are two relational orders in the home. Not one, but two. There's the spousal relationship, that is the husband and the wife. And then there's the parental relationship, that is between parents and their children. Which one of these is more fundamental? Exactly. The spousal relationship is the fundamental, is the foundational relationship of the home. Without the spousal relationship, there is no home. There are no offspring, or there shouldn't be. Unfortunately, that's becoming a problem as well. But look with me at Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24, where we see that expressed. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother, the breaking of the original home unit, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Let me read all of this, and then hopefully I won't forget the comment that I want to make here. But anyway, Genesis 1, 27 and 28. We've alluded to several times. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them. And God blessed them, and God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. You notice male and female had created them from that relationship. He says, be fruitful and multiply. And from that relationship, he says, have dominion over the rest of creation. This is part of the foundational relationship between man and the rest of God's creation. Look at chapter 4 and verse 1. Now Adam knew his wife, and that's not just a redundant expression. Adam knew his wife from the very beginning, because when Eve was formed, what was the first thing that Adam did? Anybody remember? God caused a deep sleep to come upon Adam, and He took a rib out of Adam, and He closed a spot, and He fashioned that rib into a woman, and He presented the woman to the man. And what was the very first thing Adam did? He examined her so that he could name her. And in the process of examining her, he realized, wait a minute, this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. And so I'm going to call her woman because she was taken out of me. He was so thorough in his examination, he came to understand how she was formed and where she came from, and that there was a special relationship that he had to her that he didn't have to any of the other animals that he had examined and named. The new here is very different than having a awareness of someone, or having a relationship with someone, or having a conversation with someone, or having examined someone closely and found out where all their scars are and all those other kinds of things. The new here is what some people like to say new in the biblical sense. He had relations with his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man. I want you to notice the last phrase. This is very important. With the help of the Lord. So she recognized that this offspring was part of the design and purpose of God. I have gotten this man-child with the help of the Lord. He has provided a way for us to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The spousal relationship is what gives rise to the parental relationship. Of those two relationships, which one is intended to be life permanent? In a way, but in a stronger sense, the spousal relationship.
Because the child is at some point going to leave and leave.
That's right. Because the children at some point leave their father and mother and start a new household. Now, are there still responsibilities? Yes. Is there still a relationship? Yes, but it's a different kind of relationship. I have a very different relationship with my mother than I did when I lived in her home as a child. She might say that I'm more well-behaved now. I don't know. I hope I am. But the one that's Jesus talked about being undissolvable, offering with only one exception to that. The one that the Bible speaks about as being in force unless one of them dies is marriage. That's the preeminent. And a lot of people, I think, get themselves in trouble when we get busy with life and we get busy with work. You know, that's a responsibility too. And we get busy with children because I have a responsibility as a parent. I want to be a good parent. I want to do this, and I want to do this for my children, and I want to help my children in this way, and I want them to be able to have this experience and do it. And then all of a sudden, what happens to the marriage relationship? It gets neglected. And far too often, marriages end when children leave the home. Because what should be the foundation of the home, that relationship doesn't exist anymore. Because it was not tended to and cared for. And so we have to understand that there are two relational orders within the home, and one of them is even more foundational than the other. One of them is more important, if you will. I don't like using that terminology because they're all important. But it's more important in the same way that when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. It's not second because it's not important to love your neighbor as yourself. It's second because loving God is the foundational one. And if you love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, then the second one comes up out of it. As John asked in 1 John, how can you love God whom you haven't seen and then not love your brother whom you have? You can't love man unless you first love God. In other words, is what he's saying. So, I can't be a good parent unless I'm a good husband. And there's all kinds of practical ramifications that arise from that. The Bible is, interestingly, extremely empty of practical advice on how to be a good husband. General statements that we must be good husbands and we must be good wives are there. Ephesians 5 is there. Other things that talk about how we ought to treat one another are present, but What makes for a good husband? What do I have to do?
Treat your wife like Christ treats the church.
Okay. Ephesians 5 says like Christ. So how did Christ treat the church? Well, he sacrificed himself so that the church could even exist. So when I get to practical things, this whole mindset that says that the husband is the head of the house, and so that means that the husband gets everything that he wants and gets to make every decision and is king of his castle and should be served and brought whatever he desires, is counter to the imagery that the Bible presents of a servant leader who sacrifices for the establishment of the relationship. The head, Christ is the head of the church, and yeah, he sets the rules, but he also died so that the church could exist. And he didn't do what was in his best interest when he did that, by the way. There are a lot of options that he had. Why did he die anyway? Because he loved the church. Were we lovable? While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It wasn't because we were lovable. It wasn't because we were so good. It wasn't because we did so many things and we had so many activities and we preached so much and we wasn't any of that. It was because he decided to love us. And so a husband should do what? Love his wife, such that he's willing even to lay down his life for her. Not because of anything that she's done, but because he has decided that that is the object of my affection, and I'm going to work to demonstrate that love. And so, Jesus is Lord, but does Jesus lord over creation? Could God make us do things? Yes. Does God make us do things? No. And so this is an interesting contrast, but I want you to catch the nuance of it. Jesus is Lord. Jesus is head. Jesus does have the right to command and to demand and even require recognition and obedience. But does he? Only in the sense that he says, if you don't recognize and obey me, then I can't have a relationship with you. Because I can't have a relationship with evil. Not because I don't love you. Because I've done all this to make a relationship possible. Once we enter into that covenant, then he becomes our advocate and our mediator and our protector and our deliverer and our Savior. Once we enter into a covenant with our wives, what should good husbands become? Protectors and mediators, advocates and saviors of their wife. It's not all about me. Not if I love my wife. Are there days where in weakness the sacrifices seem to be too much and you want to take for yourself? Sure. And you go, you know what, I don't care. I've been doing this and I've been doing without, and I'm going to just go out and do what I want to do. And then a husband that truly loves his wife, if he gives in to those desires out of weakness, should wake up and say, what? What am I doing? How much is too much to give for your spouse? And you know what plays out practically in homes all across this nation and the world is, well, I'm not getting anything out of this relationship, so I'm not putting anything into it. And that is not the model that God has provided for us. The model that God provided for us is, I put everything into this relationship before you even knew that you wanted to be in it. While you were still dead in your trespasses and sins, I did all this to make this possible. How much is too much to give? How much is too much to sacrifice? These are foundational relationships that need to have serious commitment. I think to a large degree it's reflective of the fact that we don't understand how foundational and important these things are. When we got newspaper reporting, we're going back a few years now, it doesn't seem that long ago to me, but news reports of people of some notoriety who have run off and run to Vegas or Reno and gotten married, and then a few hours later they're dissolving those relationships. Those are relationships that began without any thought and that ended without any hesitation. Why? Because they don't appreciate it. They don't appreciate what it is. They don't appreciate what it means to be married and what they're committing to when they make such a commitment. We have television shows. Luckily, the one that I can remember is not on the air anymore, but what was it called? Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire or something? It came after the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire thing. But anyway, the whole show, it was a Fox show, I think, but the entire show was a guy who supposedly was a millionaire and a group of women who were trying to woo him so that they could marry this millionaire. And the show ended at the end of the season with him picking which one he was going to marry and them getting married. So marriage is not a joke. And you don't build a TV show around it. It's much more serious than that. It goes back to the creational purpose of God for mankind. At least as far as it pertains to His body and His life on earth. We shouldn't take it for granted. And then the offspring that come out of that relationship, we also should not take for granted. When we become parents, we have responsibilities, but we function as a unit. We don't function as individuals anymore. I think we did talk about this a little bit last time. It's hard. But you got to plan and you got to work. And my primary way in which I deal with these kind of questions is when a child comes to me to ask permission for something, my first question is, have you talked to your mother about it? I got to know that first. And if the answer is yes, it's what did she say? And then if I get that information and I'm satisfied with the information I've received, then I will concur, or if I have reservations, I will go speak to her, not to the child. At least that's what I try to do. Sometimes I may not be patient enough, but that's what I try to do, because parents need to be presented as a unit. The man cleaves to his wife. They become one flesh. And if you have talked to my wife, you have talked to me, as far as I'm concerned. And by the way, our legal system used to understand and believe that as well. Our legal system used to recognize that a wife or a husband could speak for the other one. It doesn't do that so much anymore. Call a credit card company sometime and try to get something done. And if you're not the named person on the card, they ain't talking to you. I don't care who you are. Because we don't respect the relationship the way we used to. We don't view it the way that we should. And so we need to think about all of those things. As we move forward, Lord willing, next week, there is a whole slew of passages. I will try really, really hard to get a list of those to you before class. And this is not going to be all of them. This is not an exhaustive list, not even close. And so if you want to bring something into the discussion, please do. That's what's going to make this discussion good. And we'll look at several passages in the Bible and talk about how they should influence the way that we view the home.